pleasure to introduce Leila Conners and her sister, who's, I hope Nadia is on this call as well. Both sisters went to AUP, and I think both studied international relations. I don't know if I have that right or wrong, but I think both of you did. And I like to think that since the work that you've done since then is so consonant with our mission, I like to think that you were inspired as a young student studying international relations in that critical year in which you graduated, 1989, when the world changed, that is something that you took into your life afterward. I want to say that you've had really an illustrious career in TV and film, also in print, and all of it in relation to all of it about telling stories, making visual narratives and verbal narratives that are really about changing people's lives, and particularly in a cluster of ideas around social justice, the environment, civil society, communities, and things like that. So some of you will recognize, I think Tree Media now, your company has been around since 96. So you founded that really fairly quickly. And that must be what, 15, 20 years now that you've, 15, 16 years that you've more than that, 26
20,
years?
20.
Possible? 20 years that you've been putting together this extraordinary filmography. So your most recent documentary is Ice on Fire with Leonardo DiCaprio, was presented at Cannes last year, 2019. You picked a good year to do that instead of 2020. The Arrow of Time on Gorbachev, 2017, presented at the Zurich Film Festival. We the People 2.0, about community and nature rights. 18 short films. Urban Roots, which was a documentary on the explosion of urban farming in Detroit, and your first feature-length documentary, which all of us know, The 11th Hour, which was co-created with Leonardo DiCaprio. And tonight you're going to be talking about, and there's so many other things that you do. You're an international speaker, and PQ, your work within PQ, but I think people want to hear from you and not from me. So tonight you're going to talk about soft power and the story machine. And Leila, we're all ears.
Well, thank you, Celeste, and thank you, everyone at AUP. Paris has my heart and is my second home, and so is this institution. It shaped me and helped create a very independent mind. I think generally AUP attracts people who are very independent and willing to think out of the box, which is certainly what is needed right now. And so I got everything I was looking for and more. And I'm not just plugging it, it's just the truth. One of the things that I learned, which is the subject of this conversation, is soft power. As a student of international politics, I'm sure everyone who is involved in that understands that there's, international political relations is all about how, nation states work together and how they cooperate and how they come into conflict. And what I found fascinating was this sort of very high level discussion around sources of conflict and how to mitigate conflict, and how in many ways soft power is much more influential than hard power. And there was just sort of this back and forth about that. And I was very taken by that, the courses at AUP that covered that. And so after I left, I immediately worked in a think tank and worked in very high level sort of elite circles around discussing how the world works. It was through NPQ and all of that. I won't go into my biography, but the reason why I mention it is, as I was in there, I could see that the truth of what is held in these higher echelons at the time before the internet wasn't actually getting to the people. So it went back to this idea of how can one use media to shape civil society? How is soft power, how is the media wielded by different entities to control what I call the story machine? So that's kind of the discussion we're having, because that's what I've been engaged in this for the last 20 or odd years. It's actually even more, I realize it's 2020 now. So 24 years is so I decided to found a company on my own, because what I learned at the time was, before the internet, I call it the topography of the media sphere. We use these words that are kind of now in the culture, but at the time we were kind of new. Douglas Rushkoff kind of invented the word meme, which was a media gene. There's this idea of topography of the internet. There's this idea of a machine that controls things. And it was really true, because if at the time, if you had something to say in 1985, there was only a few ways you could say it. You could only say it if you had relations with news organizations. You had to be working for the New York Times, CBS, ABC in the States, or TF1. And I think at the time, M6 was actually the first new channel that was introduced in France. And we only had like 5 channels in France at the time. So the access to getting ideas into the world, there were very few gateways. And the gateways weren't explaining the world in the way that I thought would be helpful to people. So we talk a lot also about the ecosystem of the mind, and the ecosystem of the mind needs to be gardened, and the soil needs to be turned over, and it needs to be seeded with good ideas. And what I saw was a lot of, as we all know now, a lot of fear mongering, I was very surprised as a young person to see that the elites that run the world were a lot more rational than I read in the paper. So there was a very big, what we call the map was departed from the landscape. So the landscape of the world as it really existed was not being described accurately by the map, which is the media entities. And so that's what caused me to create a Tree Media. I said, hey, wouldn't it be a good idea to try to have an independent film media company at the time to do that? And my pathway took me, there's a couple of, I have a lot of anecdotes, but I guess one of the big anecdotes that I could tell you about was the work that I did with Mikhail Gorbachev. So my husband at the time ran Green Cross International, and we had a chance to spend a lot of time with Gorbachev. And I was fascinated, as Celeste says, 1989 was a huge year. It was the end of the Cold War. We had the collapse of the wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it was a fascinating time, obviously, because the whole world and the world structures changed. When I pretty much, probably by, I would say 97, I got to know Gorbachev very well and spent a lot of time with him. And I would ask him, I said, what caused the fall of the Soviet, what was the main reason why the Soviet Union fell? And he said, soft power. It was Ted Turner's Goodwill Games and CNN. And so to me, that was a fascinating statement to me. Of course, there was the arms race. Of course, there was a lot of that pressure that one would think was the reason of collapse. But he said the internal dynamics of the people had fundamentally changed because the world was, they were aware of the world. I was also aware of a lot of work through Radio Free Europe, Voice of America. All that stuff actually worked. It actually worked over the long haul, which I guess, by the way, small caveat, I'm not surprised. And that was all radio, by the way. I'm not surprised that the Russians use media to try to change our story, right? Because we were doing that for many, many decades, and it did work. I guess that's what he said. So that's a small anecdote about how that works. But what I find fascinating in terms of truth and the map, so, you got the landscape as it is and the map and storytelling within this frame, is that you would never hear about what Gorbachev said. It's all about how we won because we escalated our arms race and we did all of those things. And so through NPQ, which was all print, we were talking about these things, but it didn't reach that many people. And the frustration that I had around that really was resolved when the internet was born. And the internet in New York, I was in New York at the time, and it was sort of this euphoric moment where we thought, oh my God, all those gateways, all of those sort of filters are going to be removed, and we're going to have a horizontal, completely 100% accessible media sphere where we could all step in and tell our truth, tell our stories, and everyone can tell their stories. It's not, no one can mitigate or manage the story machine as it has been set up. And so that actually happened. We actually had a moment where we could do that. One of the anecdotes I can tell you is we were aware of a Chinese dissident who was in jail, Wang Xinsheng, and we felt that he was talking about the potential for Chinese democracy or Chinese people to be more involved. And we did a petition to release him. And it was the first petition on the internet to do anything, much less release a political prisoner. We got private emails from the Chinese leadership. There were so many signatures that they literally said, we agree. I'm not saying it was us that got him out, but he did get released a year later. So there are obviously ways to pressure people way back then. The biggest battle that we had after that, and once the internet started to develop, was that, again, as we know now, it's kind of, is that there are these, large entities that are starting to control the internet, right? So first it was through access to connectivity. I did a long story with Wired about connectivity at the time and about how access was really important. It still is, as we see with the pandemic. But the topography started to reemerge again, and the battle started to change again. So rather than having a few gateways to these large, television stations and newspapers, now we have the algorithm. Now we have the hackers or the reroutes through the routers. So if you post a post on Twitter and it's probably going to be liked by a lot of people, the algorithms can be changed so that people can see your tweet or not, obviously. Or, even websites. We've encountered this directly with the big thing that we've been involved with for a while is the climate movement. So the climate movement and climate change, obviously, in America is quite a hot topic for obvious reasons. The fossil fuel industry likes it the way it is, the way they make money. And I have not only battled the ability to talk about climate very basically with the existing structures, even with our friends, even with, let's say, climate scientists, they're so battered by this conversation that they're afraid that if you actually tell the truth about what's happening, that the backlash against them and their lives and everything else is going to overwhelm them. And so even with this sort of open, this is all, I guess I hope I'm being clear, but basically as we were developing and we thought, oh my God, there's this internet freedom, let's start talking about climate, let's start talking about soft power, let's talk about media, let's talk about culture, let's talk about all these things, the topography started to emerge again. And so we tried to start messaging around these things. And one way to do it is through celebrity. And that has been very interesting because Leo obviously has the biggest megaphone in the States, and I think also I know globally around the environment, and also knows a lot about it, and also puts millions of dollars towards it. And he actually, we were wondering if it would work, working with a celebrity, and we did. Obviously, we tried it, and it was a very good experience. But when you start working with a celebrity, it brings all these other elements into play, which in America polarizes people, but it also penetrates into places where you wouldn't have penetrated in before. So it's been interesting when you start getting to those levels of play. I've had major newspapers, for example, try to tell me I can't talk about methane. It was one of the big anecdotes I could, share is that we were working very early, about now like 8 years ago, on methane in Siberia. And there were these Siberian scientists that were like, look, there's methane bubbling. There's kilometers wide methane bubble fields that are escaping into the atmosphere. This is an emergency. We need to talk about it. And I would call, and I can't name the paper because I don't want to get them mad, but they were like, that's impossible. The methane doesn't break the surface of the ocean, and it'll only, that's not happening. And I'm like, excuse me, you're the newspaper of record. This is happening. I've seen the videos. And, they not only threatened me, but they also threatened, they said, anyway, they successfully suppressed a project I was doing with Leo to talk about it, because Leo was really worried about it. And then we finally put it out a year later without Leo involved. And then another year later, we put his name on it. And now we realize everyone's rushing to press saying, oh my God, the methane's melting. You know, there's all these bubbles in Siberia. So the reason why I think they do this is because they treat people like children, and they think that they're going to make people afraid. And these gateways manage the ecosystem of the mind in such a way that I don't know if it's intentionally a control so much as it's an assumption about human society, and which I believe is wrong. I think obviously you need to treat people like they're sophisticated and have capacity for rational thought. And I would say, I liken it to having cancer. If you go to the doctor and you have cancer and it's stage 4 cancer, do you want the doctor to tell you it's stage 4 or stage 1? Because they don't want to freak you out. I mean, that's where we are with the climate discussion. We're in stage 4. They want to pretend we're maybe now we've moved to stage 2. But the story machine around climate is just incredibly messed up, and has slowed us down. And I guess I could end, there's so many more things I can say, but I can end with the lack of ability to talk about the truth in its full blush has caused the collapse of our society. And the reason why I say it has caused is that even though we're not fully collapsed, I would argue that America's 25% collapsed. I would say now with the pandemic, that's going to accelerate. The pandemic was a noble process and a concept that we could have prevented years and years ago. We've always talked about pandemics. We've always talked about encroachment into, natural reserves of where viruses lie. I've actually interviewed a woman recently about that. I mean, there's many more viruses that are going to emerge if we don't get this understanding of where we are and what the viruses are. We know all of this stuff. We knew about climate we knew about climate 50 years ago. So it's a battle. So the soft power battle is real. And the fake news thing is sort of, for me, it's just a higher level of play. It's not really a surprise. It's where the battle lies. And so the story machine, which is sort of that entity that wants a certain story to be told, is really managed by the global sort of media elites that meet sort of the political elites that meet some of the corporate millionaires who want to manage what we know and what we don't know. And so you have these sort of independent mavericks coming out saying, hey, check it out, look at that. And then they can just say, oh, you're fake news too. So it's just like saying you're a terrorist in the hard power category, right? Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. But we learn in international politics, national actors are the only ones allowed to use force. Subnational or extranational actors are not allowed to use force, right? Then you're a terrorist. So really, the work that we do is to really try and find out what the truth is, and let's just say it. And so now, given the algorithms, we're actually going to launch our own platform media channel finally after all these years, because we don't feel that even with Leo, even with Warner Brothers or HBO or all these things, they are still, not that these entities, not Leo so much, but the media companies are, obviously they need to make money. I understand it, that's fine, but their goal really isn't what our goal is. They're not compatible really anymore. So we have to start creating these independent channels, and the hard part about it is, how do you build trust? And so that I don't have any answers. All I can say about that is authenticity and persistence. Because, we said, hey, there's methane bubbles, and there are methane bubbles. So eventually, over time, you build a track record. So I think we have a long enough track record, by saying what we saw and then it coming to pass, that's the only way you can really trust. So that basically is sort of a quick romp through what I've seen. I guess, I don't know how long has it been, but maybe I should open up to questions. What do you think?
Yes, let's so again, please use the group chat function to add any comments or questions. This is fascinating, Leila. Thank you so much. I guess one question, you dropped this in at the beginning of your conversation. Now I want to come back to you and say, and ask it back to you, which is, why is it so hard for the truth to go viral? So you've described algorithms and competing media. One of the things you said when we were talking about how this talk might go, which I found fascinating, was the resurgence of people's attention to things like radio and podcasts. So actually, in the ironic world of distraction, we do have people's attentions for 24 minutes at a time now. How do you pull those things together in a time when?
Yeah. Well, I think in our discussions, we're looking at a time when we will not. I know several friends who've been kicked off YouTube for things that were not deemed appropriate, and it was perfectly fine. They were actually reposting some videos from 1918 around the pandemic. You know, these are old stories, and these were first eyewitnesses of what was going on in 1918, and they got removed from YouTube. So that's just one tiny example. Again, like when I was trying to talk about methane, the backlash and the vitriol was intense. And so then we said, what would be the way to get around all this? And I said, you know what, where there's no gateway is radio, because radio, and that's what we did during the Cold War. We had Radio Free Europe, like I mentioned, Voice of America. Radio goes over, I guess you can jam it, I don't know, but the point is that radio in the United States is a very important technology, I think, because the internet is going to more and more be compromised. And I actually was thinking, I used to have a very good database programmer on because we did a ton of web at one point, but I was like, I need a hacker on staff, because I just want to know like where we're being blocked. I don't even know. So yeah, radio, podcasts though, if you have your own website, again, it's all digital. And some of these routers, here's an interesting thing. So with Leo, we did 4 short films on climate again, but it was more about the transition to renewables, and it was called Green World Rising. And it got a lot of play about, I don't know, it was 6 years ago now. And I got calls from Kansas, Missouri, Alabama saying, we can't see your website, So that tells me that the route, and this is not conspiracy, this is just my own, experience, is that some people can't even get to certain information. So I think the internet is compromised at this point.
Great, we do have a couple of questions I'd love to throw at you here. From Natalie. Hello, Leila. Thank you so much for this remarkably inspiring and brilliant talk. Agree. This really gives me hope that we will be able to move beyond the inherent issue of climate change being a future issue that's removed from this world. Since there's been a history of people simply not listening, how will you be evolving your storytelling to engage more people in the conversation?
In climate, oh yeah, we're always working on climate. I think we're well into solution. I think the good news about climate, if there is any, is that we know what to do. We've known what to do. We have what it takes to fix the problem. The question is mobilization, and that's really what we're focused on right now. We've launched very recently something called Catching Carbon, which is sort of a global call to just put some of these technologies in place, plus trees. Everyone knows trees. Yes, trees, 3 trillion trees, that'll be great. But we should do direct air capture, kelp. There's a lot of things, soil. There's 80 drawdown, Paul Hawken, which was in Ice on Fire. Paul Hawken had a great drawdown book. If anyone's interested in that, look at that book, implement most of what you can in that book in your countries. We need to reverse climate. We can reverse climate disruption. Now, the percentage chance that we do that, given the political dialogues, given the stories we're hearing, it's looking less and less likely by the day. We have 5 years to put these things in place. I think everyone knows these numbers. If we don't, we will see. I would just say that this pandemic is an amuse-bouche for what's to come. And I'm not, again, trying to be fear-mongering. It's just true. It's just true. And so we need to fix this. And that was the biggest problem. And we were talking about this like 15 years ago. You know, when Gorbachev left the Soviet Union, he found the Green Cross because there's two problems. It was nuclear weapons and the environment. And I want to create the green helmets to respond to environmental catastrophe. And climate quickly became a main topic. And so, the climate discussion needs to happen now, or, you know, some people say, you know, we're going to experience, you know, more collapse, basically. And we don't need to have that. And we don't need to have climate problems on top of pandemics. And that was the final thing I will say. And I think we talked about this even at AUP, but even after, is that if you're a leader, you don't want to let certain problems bubble along because there are other problems that are going to come. Then you're going to have to deal with several problems at the same time. So as you can see in America, our underfunding of our infrastructure, we have a dam break at the same time that we have no medical infrastructure. That's because we've been gutting medical infrastructure and everything else for, you know, for other priorities, mainly being a large defense budget, as we all know. So, and we have no internet in place. So, you know, our infrastructure is underfunded for 40 years. And now we see what's going on with that, with the pandemic.
Great, thank you. Celeste, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, do you think that COVID has been a bit of a wake-up call? I mean, what's clear is that that pandemics and the environment are coextensive. It's all part of the same problem. I mean, pandemics happen because of what we've done to animals, to biodiversity, deforestation, you know, the whole sort of set of linked things that are part of our rape of the earth. And so I'm just wondering, because climate change is so slow and imperceptible, and that's the big challenge of getting people to sort of wake up and feel it as an urgency. But the pandemic has been climate change in a pressure cooker. Do you feel in any way that we're at a different moment, that everybody, while they were sitting in their houses for the last couple of months, listened to bird song, saw how quickly the earth could bounce back if given just a little space to breathe? Do you think that this might be a kind of wake-up moment?
Oh, 100%. And I mean, it sounds silly, but, you know, us in the climate movement, we're jealous of COVID because it actually clarified things in like 3 weeks. But we always said, you know, it's like, again, if I hear it one more time, it's like humans react when the saber-toothed tiger is coming over the hill, and then they'll, you know, and with climate, that's too late. When we can see climate, then it's done because we're in geologic time, right? And so, and then I keep saying, well, we're at a different level of the video game. As a human project on this planet unfolds, we need to be better adapted to the oncoming threats and the oncoming challenges. And if we need to wait for that saber-toothed tiger to come over the road, then we're still in the Stone Age. So we are not in the Stone Age anymore. We are way beyond that, and we need to be able to perceive threats that are not, you know, right in front of our eyes, and in the way that we understand it biologically. And what I've come to understand is that we may not, I think, again, a certain percentage of the population understands this, but can this percentage of population change a story machine in time in order to get the will to move forward in the way we need to move forward? And right, and that's what we've been working on, right? So COVID absolutely has sent us to our room. It took the planet and said, go to your room and think about stuff. And yes, and the moment humans get out of nature's way, nature comes back. It's incredibly resilient, which a lot of our storytelling in the future has a lot to do with nature tech, nature supporting natural systems, and how we can work in collaboration with nature to heal the world. We can heal this world. What really frustrates me is that we can absolutely make this an amazing, beautiful place with inclusion for everyone. I mean, there is enough to go around. We really are dealing with old thinking, a lot of greed, a lot of power centralization unnecessarily. So COVID, I think, has revealed a lot of this clearly. However, do we have the will to act on what we've learned? And do we have, those of us who do understand, do we have the will to implement what we have learned. And can we? And that's actually, again, we're founding this channel called N2K. That is literally what we're going to attempt to do. It's a small little, we call it like a little rebel alliance against the Death Star, but you know, that's kind of where it's at, you know, because if we're still in America wondering if we should wear masks or not, I woke up this morning with like, well, we think it's a good idea, you know, let's, I mean, I'm just like, oh my God, why can't we just look at, you know, Asia? And the moment, you know, I think they were wearing masks in what, in December? We're still wondering.
So true. Thank you. That it's a real dilemma. So we have a couple comments I want to read before we get to our next question. One is from Sarah, which I think really speaks to what you just said. It is exhausting to see how the pursuit of political and economic gain dismisses the importance of our health and well-being. In the US, the establishment is still pushing for leaders that don't have a great record on fighting for social economic justice. So perfect lead off, Sarah, from that last comment.
Yeah, true.
Elliot Garcia says, hi, Leila, do you think
He's our old friend.
Oh, good. Do you think we've become a headline-only focused society, and as a result, this has fueled the fake news paradigm? The need to read the entire story has been diluted.
Oh yes, Elliot and I went to school together, AUP.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I would say yes, 100%. The idea of the lead, you know, in journalism, they say you got to understand the lead, you got to lead with the lead and all this stuff, has destroyed truth because that's not the point. You know, what's interesting is I love the Financial Times. I mean, journalism is slipping with them even, but they just used to say, hey, this is what happened. The article's that long, as opposed to the LA Times, where there's like a 5,000 word article explaining, let's just say there was an earthquake, but it'll start like, so-and-so was eating the bacon in the breakfast this morning, there were scrambled eggs and the sky was nice, and then their earth started shaking and it was a 6.0. It's like, it's a 6.0 earthquake, it happened, let's move on. There's too much going on, I don't want to read all this other stuff. But they were trying to entertain, so the lead is an idea of catching the attention, and then you need to entertain and engage, which I think now entertainment, I think the generations of, like, I have children and I'm watching them, they want authenticity. They know when they're being marketed to, they know when they're being distracted, they know it, it's in their DNA. That's why they're starting to call them iGen. They understand this manipulation. They understand memes really well. So that gives me hope, because we need to go away from the lead, away from that 60 character tweet or however many characters is now, to just the information. We just need to, you know, and again, it's like health, it's like food, it's like humans will act according to the information they are given. And if the information is constantly being manipulated, eventually, and I think a lot of what has to do with the right-wing movement in the United States now is that they have been literally given a that is so disconnected from the map, you know, actually the map is so departed from the landscape for them that there's so much tension that's leading to violence. That's what happens when you lie to people for 40 years.
Great. So I'm going to combine two questions into one here. I'm going to start with Helene's question. She says, thank you, Leila. How can individuals contribute to changing the power of the conscious world citizen? And then I'm going to go right into the next one from Katya, who says, I love what you're saying about mobilization. As a young person, recently graduated, I feel I'm about to join the battle for the ecosystem. Isn't that great? Please, Katya, you are a warrior. Do you have any advice as to how someone like me could involve themselves hands-on in the fight? I feel like those are two versions of a similar question.
Well, yes, thank you. Join us. join the movement. It's not even a movement. I hate, you know, those are old terms. It's really just being human. I think that the environment is not a subject. It is part and parcel of who we are as human beings. We live here. I love this idea of the biomimetic concepts, which is Biomimicry understands that we live on Earth, and Earth has an operating instruction manual. The Earth works in a certain way. We have gravity, right? We walk on gravity. That's a fact. You can't argue, I guess. We are on a globe, but they're even as flat earthers, whatever. So the point is that there are certain truths that we can operate on. And so when you look at it that way, all the young people that are coming into this, I don't want to call it fight, but this reality, you can now engage on that level. So, okay, so you say, I want to help. All right, so choose what you want. Is it the Amazon? Is it the boreal forest? Is it the waters? Is it the coral? Is it farming? You know, farming amazingly is going to be the new internet. Farming is where we can tick off many boxes. You know, you can save the soil, which will sequester carbon. You will feed people better. You can do trade with unilateral trade between different countries around certain well-produced products. You can go around the world and work with people who are trying to save what is left. We have a series I've always wanted to do, which was greenlit for 5 minutes at Netflix, and then they thought it was too complicated. But basically, it's all about First Nations people protecting those last places where you know, we've used up everything, right? So in Sweden, only 4% of the original boreal is left. And so the timber companies are trying to go in there. You know, the Alaska Pebble Mine is going to be horrific. It's got tons of, you know, so there are these last battles that really need to be understood. And we're working on a lot of post-extractive stuff. Like, can we live in a world post-extractive society? Meaning, do we have to mine anymore? We have 200 years of gold. We've mined out of the earth. 200 years worth of gold is already out of the earth and sitting wherever it's sitting. Do we really need to put that mine in Northern Ireland? It's going to be the biggest mine in Europe. We're going to do a project on that. You know, so as a young person, I would argue you either want to get involved with the story machine, because we need to change hearts and minds, or you go right into actual work on the ground. I wouldn't be an intermediary in a sense. You know, I wouldn't try to be in the middle. I think we need boots on the ground, literally, in the passive sense.
Great.
Does that answer the question? I'm not sure I answered the first.
I think it does. I like that answer at the end, that you work on the story or you work on the ground. That's really, that's interesting. Natalie says that needs to be a series. So I think she's referring to the Netflix that they said was too complicated. We don't.
Yeah, we're working on it. That's what I'm saying. I'm tired of pitching.
Yeah. So Mimi asks, Mimi, who's from our founding class of AUP and has been on several sessions, so also a Californian. Who are you looking to for inspiration today concerning your work? Who's your inspiration for you?
Well, Janine Benyus, the biomimicry woman. I look to First Nations, have a lot of wisdom that I'm very interested in. I also am inspired by those people that I don't know yet, but I find who have actually solved the problem, like the Climeworks guys in Switzerland, two German young men, engineers, who for their thesis said, wouldn't it be interesting if we can pull carbon out of the sky? And the battles they had with their own thesis, committee, they were denigrated. They were told they were going to fail. They were going to get kicked out of school. I mean, it was insane. Okay, so they literally fought for 10 years to do direct air capture. They're in our movie Ice on Fire. Of course, they invent it out of existing tools, and now everyone on their thesis committee wants to be on their board. So it's like those people I'm inspired by. I'm inspired by the woman that gets on the tractor and goes up the hill every day to do the every week to do the carbon readings. There are real people, and this is to the graduating class. There are real people who are doing real things, and they're fixing everything, and you've never heard their names. The interesting thing is too, especially with what one's learning at AUP, is that you can be we need more and more, especially from an American perspective, international people. I mean, we really need people who understand that other people aren't the devil and other people are not, it is absolutely critical because we are here, especially bifurcating into very small-minded stories. and to what extent in the story machine you can talk, share, and meet other people around the world and share their stories and do what they're, show that they're human, is incredibly important, because everyone's becoming afraid of the world. And the pandemic, one thing that I don't like about the shutdown is that it's preventing people from seeing each other, also globally. And that is a huge problem, I think.
Boy, that we sure feel that way at AUP. That is a huge problem, and we need to fix that. Anna Sandell says, hi, Leila, and wants to know about academic research on policy related to the issue. What are your views on that?
I can say that one more time. Sorry.
Academic research on policy.
So academic research on policy for climate or policy in general for media?
I don't know, Anna. Maybe I could unmute you, and you could say that. Oh, actually, I thought it was you. It's Mark Sandell. Yeah.
Oh, hey, Mark.
So Mark, climate change or do you? Let me just unmute you, Mark. Here, hold on. Unmute. Okay.
There we go. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Leila. Looking great.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, I'm in Monaco, and we have a good prince here called Prince Albert.
You do. He likes trees.
He likes trees. He likes the environment, and we're looking at trying to do something on the environment and policy area. I'm also on the board of the Foundation for Post-Conflict Development, and I'm noticing terrible scenarios and its impact on life, people's lives, and how it's an ecosystem. It's a holistic system where everything degrades at the same time, and also everything rises at the same time if one puts one's heart into it.
That's true.
So I was wondering about on the policy issue, because it's part of, you said there were two parts, the media communication and boots on the ground, and the least appealing part is in the middle, and that's where I'm interested in, unfortunately for me, but this is, somebody's got it.
I'm just saying that the middle right now, which I guess is the policy, I think and I was thinking, what do I mean by the middle when I said that? But what it is important. Of course, everything's important, but where I find it, so when the ship is sinking and you have to start bucketing out, you're not worried about the controls it's like, okay, the ship is sinking, there's a hole, I'm bucketing out now, right? So that's how I see it. It's like, and we need to tell everyone to grab the buckets. So if you can fix the engine and fix the thing, great. And so that's maybe where policy comes in. So I would say for Monaco, and I know, in fact, I think your prince, actually somebody had contacted us about the trees last year, but which is great. And we always keep Monaco and your leader in mind when we think about future stuff. So, but what I would say is Drawdown. For policy, look at Drawdown. Are you aware of that book? Paul Hawken, it's just called Drawdown. Get it, it's in its 11th printing. It came out during Ice on Fire. And it will tell you some of the things you can do in Monaco. I'm not sure if you can grow kelp there in the sea.
No.
But kelp is fantastic, or any other form of seagrass. I would quickly, from a policy standpoint, because I know Monaco I've been to the aquarium there, and I know there's a love of the ocean. I would try and see what is going on with the ocean there. And I would also advise you to looking at ocean stuff, including marine snow and things like that. I would definitely look at the Drawdown book, because there's a lot of policy directions that you can go in from that.
Thanks, Leila. Maybe I'll be able to reach out to you later.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm happy to talk further about this.
A friend of mine, Christian Moore, he's started something called the Global Environmental Movement. And he might be also on this call too, I hope. I told him about you.
Oh, great. Yeah. Hi, Christian.
I don't know if he's there, but anyway, I'll let everybody else get back. It's great to see you again, Leila.
Good to see you too.
All right.
Thanks, Mark. That was great.
Thank you.
I love that your peers are on this call, Leila. It's fun to have some AUP alums jumping in and talking with you and reconnecting over this.
I haven't talked to Mark in 30 years.
Great.
Did you recognize me?
Yes, of course.
And you both have such passion for this issue.
AUP.
And AUP, of course, at its center. Natalie jumped in again to say that she was only at AUP for a semester. I think, Natalie, you probably were part of our Trojan transfer program, and you just graduated from USC. Congratulations. She's wondering if anyone on this chat has any recommendations on getting involved in the international sphere or AUP. She also wrote, or other international universities post-grad, but of course I think AUP. Would love advice and appreciate your advice. Natalie put her email right in the chat function, so take a look, and if somebody has thoughts for her, please do respond. I, of course, said I think the magic program would be a great fit for you. She also went on to say that Drawdown has a fabulous website as well. So I wonder if we could throw that, find and throw that website. We'll be sending a confirmation later.
Drawdown.org. Drawdown.org. I can.
Perfect. So that's really helpful. So we're coming to the end of this conversation, which I think we all agree we could go on for hours talking about this issue in this moment. Lucky AUP, Leila, that you took this time to be with us today. And we always finish these conversations, or most recently we've been finishing with sort of what we hope will be an easy question for you, but there are 35 of us on this call, and what would be something that you would want us to remember most from this conversation, and as I like to say, to pull out at our next Zoom cocktail party and convey to other people, or impress people with this knowledge that you obviously have so rich information. What should we know and talk about?
Well, I would say there's a lot I would like to say, but two cocktail, one in the direction of the soft power and one in the direction of environment. But the idea of the other, and the idea of, it is really important right now to keep connecting with other human beings and different people, and understanding that the media that you're getting from the main sources oftentimes has got layers of agenda that may or may not be serving you, and you have to be very clear on really go to sourcing. I mean, read scientific journals. If you want to know about what's going on with the pandemic, read virologists, follow virologists on Twitter. They have really interesting discussions about what the virus is doing. Don't get it through necessarily the larger sources. I mean, you obviously read it, but understand that if you really are interested in something, go to the source. The next thing is, and that's what we try to be as close to the source as we can. The next thing is on the environment. It is possible. Drawdown. Look at Drawdown, understand what you can do, and either fund it or do it, because we need to draw trillions of pounds of carbon out of the sky, and we need to do it now. And we can. Thank God we can. I mean, at least it's not some sort of asteroid that's coming to hit Earth and we don't know what to do. So
that's a wonderful way for us to close. Celeste, any comments or last question?
Whoops, we do have just a few more minutes. Tell everybody why they need to go see Ice on Fire.
Oh, well, this is my problem. I hope you can, because HBO is lovely and I love them and they were a dream to work with. However, they don't have it live, I think, everywhere. So if you're in a place where you can see it, please do. And the reason is, it really lays out how we reverse everything. And it does have the methane. We finally were able to tell our methane story in Ice on Fire. And we really try to explain how the Earth works. And a lot of people think they know, and maybe you do, but really it's about cycling. It's about cycles. And we say, listen, this whole climate thing, forget the word climate or climate disruption. It's really about the carbon cycle. This is really a carbon cycle problem. And Ice on Fire is methane, basically, is another word for methane. And this methane eruption is a carbon cycle issue. And we can fix it. So it's carbon up, carbon down. It's really basic. And that's what Ice on Fire is all about. But it's actually really beautiful and entertaining to watch. Weirdly enough, it sounds super dry, but it's not. We tried to make it beautiful and interesting. But it's on HBO Max. It's on online HBO. I know there's HBO Nordic. I know it was on Sky, I believe, or and in different countries. So, yeah.
I'm gonna look for it.
Great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us
Well,
and
I
for sharing
appreciate
your enthusiasm and also your optimism and hope for the future.
Yeah, you know, I do. I have, you know, it's like, could be like being from LA, could be like a Hollywood ending. It's really bad. And then at the last minute, we fix it all. It's
I
possible.
can tell you that on campus last year, we're focusing at AUP on climate advocacy, climate communications, climate advocacy, translating science for the public, right? And so a lot of students at AUP, a lot of our graduate students who are in global communications, but a lot of our, and we have graduate students also in diplomacy and international law. A lot of them have chosen to really focus their efforts, but the undergraduates too. So we did this fabulous conference last spring, drew 130 students, plus
Wow.
students from other universities nearby. We had members of the Nobel Peace Prize Forum come in to speak to the students. There were 20 faculty across the university in all disciplines who created workshops for the students. It was a hive. And then 4 of our students, the organizers of that conference, went to Oslo PAX and represented AUP at Oslo PAX. So we're very focused on the environment. We have an Edward and Joy Freeman Environmental Science Center. And so this is something, as you know, we care very much about.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
That's
Thanks,
fantastic work. Great job. I mean, I hope it was helpful, and I enjoyed it at least. It's a lot to talk about. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Leila. Thank you so much, everybody. Virtual applause from everyone on this call.
Thank you.